The Lost Year, Chapter 1, Reeling. It took near 2 months for repairs to the citadel to be complete. The dragon had done the majority of the damage. Ramparts had to be rebuilt along with houses in the lower town. Gwen was working with the royal seamstress for the time being. It seemed that Uther didn't want to dismiss Morgana's maid. Perhaps he feared that would make her loss more real. The western wall had to be rebuilt nearly from the ground up after it had basically collapsed, and all they could find of evidence as to how the beast had escaped was scattered pieces of cold iron around the cave. Somehow, the place had never grown dusty enough for a reliable trail on whoever had done the deed. Gaius had been consulted on what could do that to cold iron, and had come up with honestly no idea short of fey magic. The dragon would not have been able to free itself with its natural power mostly suppressed. It was impossible to suppress the powers of a true creature of magic completely. Leon personally thought that was a little terrifying. But the mood in the castle had shifted over the last few weeks. Just a week before the dragon had attacked, an illness, likely magical in nature, had fallen over Camelot, and the Knights of Medir had risen. The end of that particular misadventure was a mystery to all but 2 people in the castle, and neither of them were keen on talking about it. It hurt too much. Morgana had been like a sister to Arthur, and one of Merlin's closest friends. She was gone. Leon privately suspected that she was dead. She had been taken by a sorceress after all, and no demands had been made, though perhaps that had been because of the dragon attack. Even a sorceress wouldn't be stupid enough to send any kind of message in the middle of the fires and chaos that had erupted from that. Leon kept all this to himself. He did not wish to be on the wrong end of Uther's wrath. Someone had suggested that the sorceress who had kidnapped Morgana had freed the dragon as well. It made a certain kind of sense. It would have either provided the fall of Camelot in and of itself, or it would provide enough of a lead time for her to vanish with Morgana permanently. Of course, Leon wouldn't voice that either, in fear of keeping his head. Something else seemed to have shifted as well. Arthur and Merlin didn't seem to spend any time out of each other's sight. They would be doing completely different tasks, but if the other was not in sight, the tension in the air would ratchet up to nigh unbearable levels. Leon, who, as the first Knight of Camelot, was helping to arrange the rebuilding efforts, had called in a favor from the steward to have Merlin put on his roster so that the two were not separated as often. It still happened, as her duties with Gaius treating the injured and dying took precedent over all else, especially since one of the people who normally helped was gone, another sore that throbbed in the wake of Morgana's abduction. Leon actually knew what had happened here. Arthur had told him of how his heart had nearly stopped when he'd entered the throne room to find Morgana in the arms of the sorceress who'd nearly tricked him into killing his father, who then sent Merlin flying across the room with a mere gesture. Merlin herself remembered none of it. Gaius had confirmed that a blow to the head, such as the one she'd suffered, that had left her out cold for the rest of the day and well into the next, could cause memory loss. All they knew for certain at the moment was that Morgana was gone, but slowly Camelot was recovering. Arthur had also told Leon something else. In the heat of the moment, believing he would die fighting unkillable knights, Arthur had finally done something he'd wanted to do for quite some time. He'd kissed Merlin. It complicated things. Exceptionally so, because neither of them had spoken to each other directly, despite not wanting to leave the other's presence. Leon understood it. It was hard enough for a knight to have a relationship with a servant of any kind, let alone a crown prince. Sure, Merlin was the exception to a lot of rules because of her odd status, but she was still of common birth, a base-born bastard who had never even known her father. Leon cared about her. She had somehow managed to take Arthur from a man Leon had been afraid to see take the throne to a man Leon was consistently proud of. It had been quite the fight to get him there over the last 2 years, but it had worked. He, along with several other knights, the ones who took notice of her, saw her as a younger sister, which was why he decided to deliver the letter for her himself. It had come from Estir. Leon knew that Merlin still had family there. He knocked on the door to the physician's quarters, then opened it to her call. Merlin was standing at the table, mixing something. She smiled as she ladled an amount of the greenish mixture into a bottle. Sir Leon, come in. Gaius is out. What can I help you with? She asked. Over the last 2 months, spending a great majority of her time as a healer rather than a servant, Merlin's reputation had grown to where she was equally known as Gaius's apprentice instead of it being an afterthought to her job for Arthur. Actually, I was looking for you. A merchant recently arrived from Estir. He had a letter for you, Leon said, pulling the letter out of the pouch on his belt. Merlin smiled and held out a hand for it, the other still swirling the bottle in her hand. He handed the letter to her, and she frowned. Setting down the bottle, she tore open the letter. Leon turned to leave. The missive was not for him to read. He trusted Merlin, probably more than some of the knights. No, she cried and ran past him, the sound of the bottle shattering on the stone floor echoing behind her. Leon reached out to catch hold of her, but she was far too quick on her feet. She was gone before the letter fluttered to the floor. Leon snatched it up. Something was wrong. Merlin would not bolt like this unless it was. It was written in a cramped hand Leon did not recognize. Merlin, your mother is deathly ill. She may have days left only. Come to Ealdor at once. It wasn't signed. Racing to the nearest window, Leon was unsurprised to find Merlin on the back of a horse, unsaddled, without even reins, galloping out of the city with the speed of desperation. Leon took the note with him to find Arthur.